Conversations podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Conversations podcast. Today, I am with Olga Garcia-Caro from RMIT University, and she is currently a lecturer and a PhD candidate there, and currently she's doing research on domestic violence interpreting. Hello, Olga. Welcome. How are you?
Hello, Fatih. Thank you very much for inviting me to one of your podcasts. Very interesting ones, actually.
Thank you very much, Olga. I just want to do a little bit of a trigger warning before we start, if that's okay. And I just want to say that things that we will be speaking about today may contain potentially distressing content. I guess that's a warning that we have to make, Olga.
Yes, indeed. Very good that it's important to advise our audience about the content.
Tell me a little bit about your research, Olga. Now, I know you're doing your research on interpreting in domestic violence settings. Can you tell us a little bit more about your research?
Well, this research was conducted here in Victoria, and it looked at the experiences of culturally and linguistically diverse women victims of domestic violence. It also looked at the experiences of service providers. So these were specifically workers from 2 organisations responding to domestic violence here in Melbourne, and interpreters with experience in working in this field. The main findings were in relation to the lack of specialist training for interpreters to work in this field, the lack of understanding also from service providers about our work, what we do and what we need as interpreters, and also about structural issues. In other words, how language services are set up, and how the setup sometimes affects this field and affects interpreters' work and service providers and women accessing services. So it seems that perhaps more discussion among the interpreting field and service providers and language services are needed in order to figure out and to better meet the needs of women, service providers, and of course interpreters as well. So that's basically this research.
And I think in 2015, there was a Royal Commission into Family Violence in the state of Victoria. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Yes, exactly right. And we were actually very lucky because, as you know, we had 6 recommendations in relation to interpreting. Now, some of these recommendations were more or had a bit more of an effect on interpreters directly, and some of them, although in relation to interpreting, well, might not directly affect interpreters in their day-to-day work. So we had recommendation 64. So the Magistrates Court of Victoria staff had to, the recommendation was that they had to hold a coordination meeting before hearings in order to give high priority to high-risk cases and also ensure that interpreters were available. So we're talking here about availability, although this is something that is out of interpreters' hand, if you will, but it is something that that affects women and affects the system, and it affects service providers as well. So it's a big issue that's been happening for quite a while, and it has a whole range of consequences. And the consequences are noted in the next recommendation, recommendation 157, And that is that the Victorian government had to update its guidelines on policy and procedures in using interpreting services, in particular to deal with family violence. And it had to look into the risk of using perpetrators and children and other family members as interpreters, and also using the same interpreter for both the victim and the perpetrator. So that's in terms of availability. Another recommendation that also had to do with availability was recommendation 158, and that is that the Magistrates Court, again, of Victoria had to allocate specific funding for family violence interpreters and to develop guidelines for booking interpreters in family violence matters. Some of those guidelines included an early process of checking whether the parties actually needed an interpreter, and this is related to then availability. Also, the practice of booking 2 interpreters for both parties if they needed, and also, and very important, to wherever possible that a female interpreter was booked for the female party. Another one, and this one in relation to Victoria Police, is recommendation 159. And this is, it recommended 2 things. One, that the code of practice of Victoria Police was amended in relation to the investigation of family violence to focus and emphasize the risks that are associated with using children as interpreters and using also the same interpreter, again, for both parties, for both the perpetrator and the victim. So we see that different codes and different recommendations and different settings, so the court system, Victoria Police, talking about the same things. And the other point was to provide practical guidance to officers, so to police officers, in the use of interpreters. So training them on how to appropriately and effectively work with interpreters. And this had to be reflected in their code of ethics. So I think that's very important as well. And the other 2 recommendations, recommendation 160, that was for the Victorian government as part of NAATI to work with other members of the authority of NAATI and ensure that accreditation and testing processes and also the courses that are approved by NAATI require an understanding of the nature and dynamics of family violence. Now, the good news is that this has been already implemented. Because some recommendations are in progress, some had a time of, in 2 years they had to be implemented. Well, all this takes some time, but at least this one has been implemented. So NAATI and all jurisdictions acknowledge the importance of ensuring that, again, accreditation and testing processes and that all their approved T&I courses required this training. So this means that students completing a NAATI approved course such as the T&I program at RMIT where I work will receive education and training in the area of family violence. And the last one, recommendation 172, is that the Victorian government fund training and education programs for disability workers. And these are including interpreters. Now, this is in progress. This one hasn't been finalised. It is slowly implementing. It's in progress. And one of the things that has been done is the redevelopment of the Family Violence Risk Assessment and Risk Management Framework, now called MARAM. Before that, it was CRAFT. Now it's MARAM. And it's been finalised and embedded in law from September 2018. Now, MARAM ensures that services are effectively identifying, assessing and managing family violence risk. And if you remember in our first webinar in relation to interpreting in domestic violence service settings, we did provide a link to MARAM, a link to this framework. So we can actually, maybe you want to include it here as well in the description portion below in this podcast. But it is important that we are familiar with it, and that we know what are the processes, how the system works, and what type of documents do services use, so that we are familiar, and that would help us in our practice, that's for sure.
That's definitely right. Now, I was going to ask you that actually further on about some resources. So we will make these resources or links, at least the most important ones, available in the podcast description, both on YouTube and also in the audio podcasts. So they'll definitely be there. Just want to ask you in regards to the implementation of these recommendations. The website works amazingly, actually. You can put in the recommendation and it'll tell you if it's implemented or if it's in progress. And from what you've told me, most of them are implemented, and I can see them here on my screen as well, especially in regards to the one about domestic violence education being included in TNI courses. Now, I know that in the higher education courses, yes, that's definitely in there. I can at least vouch for that on behalf of RMIT. Hopefully other TNI programs are equally delivering these units or these particular topics. What about the skill set courses? I'm not quite sure, because I've got a hand in delivering some skill set courses as well, because some of the languages don't have access to higher education or diploma or advanced diploma level education, because those languages just aren't offered at that level. So if you have a new and emerging language and the only formal training you do have access to is a NAATI skill set course, which is about 10 weeks or so, it's quite a short course. I'm not quite sure if there's any family violence training within this short course, to be honest with you, who majority of the students are new and emerging language interpreters or candidates of these languages.
I am not sure either. I do know that at least at RMIT, we have our higher education program, and there's also the VE program, so the vocational education. And I know that our colleagues in that program also include, as part of it, as an approved NAATI course, they include training in the nature of family violence. I'm not sure about the skill set. At RMIT, we actually are developing a skill set in particular for interpreters working in family violence service settings. So that is it's developing now. It's not available yet, and we are working in that, because we think that it's important that interpreters who might already be working, are already practitioners, can have access to this skill set. If they already have a master's, they already have a degree, they've already gone through an advanced diploma, or they've been working for 20 years, they might want to do a short course, a skill set. However, I am not sure. I do know that you've been running these skill sets for these new and emerging languages, but I am not quite sure. Maybe you would know whether you've had included that content,
Well,
but it might be something.
Let me tell you, there isn't much in there in regards to that. So that might be something that we could look into, I think.
Yes, probably because these skill sets are very focused on giving these new, particular for these languages where there's no certification available, perhaps giving them the core or the main skills for them to be able to perform, and not so much specialized contextual knowledge, perhaps.
I mean, I'm only pointing it out because I know I might have put you on the spot here, but you know, when I have a look and there's a green tick and it's implemented, I'm just not quite sure if it's implemented at all levels, to be honest with you, because not all students have access, or not all interpreting candidates have access to VE or HE courses because their languages aren't.
Yes, exactly right. Well, more work to do then.
Indeed, that's something I guess we can ask the question on. Now, within regards to, you were talking about some of the issues. Now, you said there was some issues regarding interpreters, some issues regarding service providers, some issues regarding language services. Let's start with the interpreters. What kind of issues did you find within your research that relates to interpreters?
I might perhaps highlight one of them. I think it's quite descriptive, if I may. One of the issues is that the challenges that interpreters face when dealing with disclosures of violence, and how this can in turn affect their interpreting skills, such as, for example, accuracy. One interpreter in particular, I remember, mentioned that listening to traumatic events and traumatic experiences had an effect on her ability to perform at maximum capacity. And so she suggested that training in knowing how to deal with disclosures of violence could help her then in accuracy and also in completeness. So that was one of, and I found it very, very important, because we have the contextual knowledge, but we don't get this training like other service providers have in dealing with these difficult experiences and events that clients and victims then tell us. So that's one of them that has then a ripple effect on in the whole interpretive interaction, like accuracy and completeness. And we see how that is very, very important then for service providers, because they will be able to do their risk assessment properly. If they don't have, if every detail is not there, or completeness, we don't complete everything that has been said, will have then an effect on how they are going to provide the services for women and for victims.
Well, anything from providing services, but also, I guess, in the courtroom or at a police station, it might also have implementations on the charges that might be laid if it's not complete. So, you know,
exactly right. Yes, access to justice can be hindered if we are not accurate and if we're not complete. That's for sure. Yes. Well, and it might not be because our skills. It might be because we haven't received that training in dealing with traumatic events and dealing with disclosures of violence. So if we don't have that training, then that's going to affect our interpreting skills. No matter how good we are at them, those other factors are going to affect our skills.
in regards to training that's out there for interpreters, when we say interpreter training, it does usually focus on our skills. It focuses on contextual knowledge. And, what kind of training can a domestic violence interpreter can get that's not purely about interpreting or contextual knowledge? So you're saying that, training in regards to dealing with these kind of situations, can you recommend any specific training that an interpreter can get for domestic violence related matters, not necessarily about their skills?
Well, two things. In relation specifically for domestic violence interpreting, as far as I know, whatever is included, as we said, in the NAATI approved courses, and also I know that in Victoria, Monash University runs professional development courses every year and funded or in partnership with the Premier's Cabinet. Now, these have been running for a few years now. I was actually involved in the first one, and I think that was, the first one I think was in 2016, 2015-16. That's more specifically for interpreting in these settings. Now, it doesn't have to always be in interpreting, as you said, and focusing only on our interpreting skills, because interpreting always happens in another field, doesn't it? It can't happen by itself. It's a field that happens within other fields. So it's crucial that we have the contextual knowledge. Interpreting is a contextualized activity, and having language skills and interpreting skills is just not enough. So we also need to remember that there are a whole range of services responding to family violence. It can be legal, police, health, social services. So learning any professional or accessing any professional development in relation to those settings, to those fields, are going to help us understand their work, their environment, their terminology, what are the goals of their work, what is it that they do, how they use language, because counsellors and social workers are going to use a different language than police, than lawyers, than legal services, right? So knowing about these services and knowing about their discourse. So police officers are going to ask a series of questions. Why do they ask those series of questions? And social workers or counsellors, psychologists are going to use a different type of language. Their goal is different. So having an understanding of all that is crucial for our work and is one of the pillars. So not only our language skills, our interpreting skills, our ethics, but also that contextual knowledge is just crucial. So any professional development that we can do in any of these fields is going to help us. That is for sure. And when we know what we know about the field, that is going to in turn going to help us with our accuracy, with our memory skills, because we won't have to rely that much on it. It's going to help us with dealing with disclosures of violence, in dealing with or providing that empathetic interpreting that needs to that is appropriate for the setting, and so on and so forth. So we could be here talking for hours, couldn't we? Because actually family violence is discussed in so many fields and can be expected in so many settings.
All Graduates Conversations Podcast.